Theory-Based Impact Evaluation. This video was shot at the Interact Event Impact Evaluations, Methods and Terms of References on the 21st of June 2016 in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. In this video, we will highlight a few impact evaluation approaches which might be feasible for INTERREG programs. For INTERREG programs with less experience in impact evaluation, the theory of change approach might be of more interest.
Now, a little bit more challenging. The importance of N in determining evaluation methods. Now, by N, I mean the population of beneficiaries, the population of observations, the population of people, communities, whatever else are benefiting from our program. And I don't want to get this too complicated, so I'll go a bit slowly and try and unpack it. In the ideal world of evaluation, as the scientists and the social scientists would have us believe, all intervention populations, i.e. N, are large. We've assisted a lot of people. There have been a lot of beneficiaries. Because we've assisted a large volume, we are therefore able to say that any consideration of those populations is statistically significant. Yeah? That's the theory. All intervention populations are large, therefore statistical tests of significance hold. The beneficiary, or what the scientists refer to as the treatment group, yeah, the intervention, the treatment, and the wider context are highly homogeneous. So you've got a very simple population that's large, and you've intervened with a beneficiary group which is numerically significant. And typically, in this ideal world evaluation, budgets, political, other constraints are not an issue for sample sizes or the use of comparison groups. In those circumstances, counterfactual impact evaluation is the obvious way to go. You've got large population, you've got a large sample, everything is very homogeneous, everything is very pure. You can therefore abstract the effects of your intervention in the confidence that you have got, a good sample, and the difference that you're observing is purely down to the intervention that you have made. And in those circumstances, counterfactual impact evaluation is the way to go. No ifs, no buts, dead straightforward. Emphasis on the word here, ideal. Because we don't live in an ideal world for evaluation, we live in a rather messy world. Very messy, very frequently, the numbers that we're dealing with of beneficiaries in the population are pretty small, and for that reason, counterfactual impact evaluation is frequently unfeasible. And because of that, there has been this development of theory-based impact evaluation as the alternative. So let's just be clear what we're saying. When we have all of these things in play, large population, large beneficiary group, homogeneity apart from the intervention, we've got no restrictions on budgets, we've got no restrictions on data, we've got no restriction on the politics. In all those ideal situations, counterfactual impact evaluation is the way to go. But the world isn't like that, therefore we have to fall back on what we call these theory-based approaches. And there is a view that somehow counterfactual impact evaluation is really the best, and this theory-based is a bit second class, it's a bit shabby, yeah? But the reality is that in many situations, counterfactual impact evaluation simply can't be done. Now, in my 23 years of evaluating, I have done counterfactual impact evaluation out of hundreds of evaluations 3 times. Yep. Because those things are so difficult to achieve. Yeah? Yes, theory-based impact evaluation does not provide a quantifiable counterfactual. We understand that. Yes, it does not provide statistically hard, statistically resilient numbers. Yes, it's actually got real limitations in deriving robust cost and benefit numbers because it's not statistically tight. But done well, theory-based impact evaluation is a very pragmatic response to understanding the difference that's being made by your intervention. Yeah? So the first message I want to get across to you is, although everybody may be talking about counterfactual impact evaluation as the way to go, it is actually quite difficult to do in practice. Yeah? You need to be pragmatic, you need to understand the situation, yeah? And you need to understand that sometimes it is necessary to drop down into this theory-based impact evaluation model. So in that first presentation, we understand that the growth of theory, yeah, in evaluation flowing out of science, social science, is now well established. That then essentially breaks down to those methods where you've got a small population and issues of heterogeneity and issues of budget. And there where you've got large populations which can be made statistically robust, where you don't have budgetary constraints, you don't have any issues of heterogeneity. And that then gives rise to this sort of spectrum of methods ranging from comparative methods, which are typically qualitative under TBIE, right the way through to experimental or quasi-experimental methods, as social scientists would undertake it for CIE. And then the different models and approaches that flow from each of these, for example, ranging on the qualitative side under here, intensive analysis to a more contrasting cases, right the way through to formal scientific experiments where everything between the beneficiary group and the non-beneficiary group are the same apart from the intervention that you have made. Yeah? And that, you know, that sort of presumes you can get to a world where the one difference between an assisted group and a non-assisted group is your intervention, and you can isolate, therefore, the effects of that intervention. Yeah? So a lot of talk at the moment about trying to get as many of us as we can playing up here as we can, yeah, but quite a set of issues. But pragmatically, probably quite a lot of time to be spent at the moment by you, your programs, me, the stuff I'm evaluating, around theory-based impact evaluation methods. And I want to just spend a few moments now beginning to look in a little bit more detail about some of the methods that underpin this. Come back to counterfactual evaluation this afternoon. Just put your hands up if you're disappointed that I'm not a huge fan of counterfactual impact evaluation. Put your hand up.
Or not either. No.
Oh, sorry, there's one enthusiast here.
Not in terms of INTERREG, but maybe the fact you said it is so rare in the real world that is a bit disappointing.
Yeah. Well, it's rare in my world of economic development. Yeah. I think if you worked in medical science or clinical trials, yeah, and you're testing a drug, then counterfactual impact evaluation becomes clearly much more straightforward. Yeah. But our world's slightly more difficult. So in this space of what I've called small n, small population, theory-based impact evaluation methods, be careful what you wish for. This is just a scatter diagram or reading through the literature of the methods that are available. Yeah, ka-chunk. Yeah, so theory of change we'll come to in a moment. Contribution analysis, prospective evaluation synthesis, policy scientific approach, outcome process mapping, process tracing, elicitation methods. Oh, there's just tons and tons and tons of stuff as to what you can do. Yeah? Now, I'm not saying to you that you need to be expert in any of these things. Yeah? What I am saying to you is, coming out of social science and the way that evaluation has developed this last 50, 60 years, there has been quite a lot of thinking as to how best you progress theory-based impact evaluation methods. And I will spend in a moment or two just a little bit of time talking through one or two of these to give you a bit more understanding. Yeah? To try and break down these TBIE methods that we've just put on the previous diagram, and this is a simplistic approach. There's what I call the group 1 approaches, which essentially are about driving out of a theory of change, which I'll talk to you about in a moment or two, driving out of a theory of change to understand the extent to which what you thought was going to happen in the logic chain and the associated theory of change has actually occurred. And the methods typically we would get coming out of this group will be the broad heading of theory of change, underneath that realistic evaluation, contribution analysis, this one and this one. I'm going to spend time talking about these three, but just be alert to these two. Yeah? So these, in a sense, are methods that drive out of what might be called a theory of change approach to TBIE. And it's important to bear in mind that this is not a question or not a case of you pick one and forget about the others. You can actually set up evaluations that actually has elements of all of these running at the same time. So I am going to do some theory of change with some realist evaluation, with some contribution analysis. Yeah? And I'll say more about those in a moment or two. And then the second, the variations on the theory tune, the second group of approaches for TBIE essentially come less out of looking at the theory of change written on paper and actually trying to understand from stakeholders, from beneficiaries, from participants, yeah, what they perceive as has been important in producing change through your intervention. And the sorts of tools we've got here, and I'll say more about the first three of those: most significant change, success case methods, outcome mapping. Yeah? And again, don't fall into the trap of believing that when you're looking at group 2 approaches, you can only do that or that or that or that. Actually, you can run these things in permutation. I'll have some of that with that, some of that with that, some of that with that. Yeah, okay. So don't get fixated in believing you can just choose the one. My point. Important to understand that the group 1 methods and the group 2 methods can often be intermingled and spliced together in real-world evaluation studies. And that's when you hear this phrase mixed methods, which again is another fashionable phrase. A mixed methods evaluation essentially means that you're using different approaches, be those group 1, be those group 2, to actually progress your evaluation intent. Group 1 approaches, yeah, 3 of these. Number 1 is what I've called the vanilla theory of change. So essentially what the vanilla theory of change does is take the logic chain we had, remember my one up here, right the way down to here, yeah, that's a logic chain, and that then starts to understand and explain how one bit of that logic chain relates to the second, relates to the third, relates to the third. How do you get from one step to the next step? What's the process? How do you get from that third step to the fourth step? What's the explanatory process? Yeah? So it takes the logic chain of intervention and moves that on into a predictive and explanatory depiction of what should happen. So let me explain that. So this, back to our fruit and vegetable thing, this, and you've got this on your desks, yeah? This is essentially depicting, in very simple terms, this one has actually gone rather from here to here, it's gone from here to here. Starting off at the bottom, working through, this is the logic chain that somebody within the commission has developed, the logic chain, and what the vanilla theory of change then does is say, okay, to get from here to here, or from here to here, or from here to here, in explanation terms, predictive terms, what will happen? Have they got this one as well, yeah, on the tables? Yes, have a look at this, yeah, because this is quite a busy one. So logic chain in the middle, and then developed here with the theory of change that explains what is happening in each of the stages. And just focus on that dialogue in the far right-hand column here, far left-hand column here. This is really important, this. Logic chains are descriptive, okay? Top left, bottom right are descriptive. Theory of change models, yeah, are explanatory and predictive. Explaining and predicting why from here to here happens. Explaining and predicting why from here to here happens. Explaining here why it happens. Yeah? And one of the exercises I want you to do will be for this Euro gung-ho to begin to think about developing a logic chain and a simple theory of change. This here does require, developing those elements, that does require quite a bit of thinking. It'll make your head hurt if you do it well. Yeah? And again, Philip's point is right. If you've really set up your program well at the outset, then at the same time as writing the logic chain, you will have developed the theory of change as a foundational plank of the program you're then going forward with. But all too often, the practice is properly thought about once you've got the money and you're worrying how things are going to happen on the ground. So that's the sort of what I've called the vanilla theory of change approach. Now, the second one that you will often hear spoken about is what they refer to as realist evaluation. Now, realist evaluation is very similarly related to theory of change. It's after these two academics, Pawson and Tilley. They place this big emphasis on, within explaining what is happening in theory-based impact evaluation, it's the combination of the context and the mechanism that gives the outcomes. All the time they're talking about context and mechanism gives rise to outcomes. And what they posit is trying to understand from a sort of an evaluation perspective, what configurations within the logic chain, what configurations of context and mechanism give rise to successful outcome, these so-called CMOCs. And what it seeks to do, what works, how, in which conditions, and for whom. So it's a little bit like, if you imagine, if we just take vanilla theory of change, which basically is just probably a single explanation of how you get from A to Z through the logic change steps, the realistic evaluation essentially is beginning to say, okay, well, that might be one route, that might be a second route, that might be a third route, that might be a fourth route. And for each of these different routes, they're trying to identify this combination of context plus mechanism equals outputs. For each of these, they're trying to understand the configuration of context and mechanisms outputs and which of these appears to give the best result in terms of achieving Z at the bottom. So typically, again, it's a theory and a hypothesis formulation exercise, developing what they call the middle range theory. That's this one in the middle, yeah. And then a series of what they refer to as conjectural mini theories or CMOCs, a wiggly one, a curved one, an angular one, which configurations seem to give the best results in terms of achieving Z. Data collection, we talked about data collection a few moments ago, how those CMOCs, each of those different shapes, have operated in practice, and from that then analysing and concluding. Having got this sort of spectrum of contexts and mechanisms and outcomes, then in analysis and review, trying to identify which of these routes appears to be the most successful in arriving at the results, the Z point, as we've expected. Okay, say more about that a little bit later on. Contribution analysis, again, anybody heard about contribution analysis? Have you covered this in your academic life? Yeah, okay. Contribution analysis is related to theory of change, but it's about trying to understand which particular parts of the program or the intervention appear to have been particularly causal on delivering what we are observing, again developed by a pair of academics, so it is, by a single academic, John Main, 1999, addressed the problem of attribution. Again, it's about trying to identify, as you move from the top of the theory of change to the bottom of the theory of change, what factors appear to have been particularly causal in contributing in delivering what is observed in terms of effect and consequence. Causality, contribution inferred beyond reasonable doubt by assessing different factors. Yeah? So which factors have been assessed and have been shown not to have made a significant contribution or are seen to have made a significant contribution to the realization of what we're seeing in terms of overall result. Again, basically involves developing a theory of change, so we're not avoiding the theory of change discipline here, it's building a theory of change, it's gathering evidence on that theory of change, rather than looking at different conjectural routes, these CMOCs that Pawson and Tilley do with realistic evaluation. It's about trying to understand those factors on the ground in delivering the program that appear to have been particularly successful in contributing to results at the bottom, yeah, and making sure that that understanding of those factors, making sure that that demonstration of those factors is hard evidence and worked through to understand those effects at the bottom. Now, that's very quickly on three methods. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on, but that's the first of the group one methods. Now, I don't want you to get into you understand tizzy? Yeah? The one that really matters on here, from my perspective for you, is this one. Yeah? This one. And once you've got that one understood, how can you explain from here to here through here and here to here through here? Once you've got that one understood and clear in your minds, then I think you graduate onto that one, the realistic evaluation. And then I think you graduate still further onto, yeah, contribution analysis. How many times have I done contribution analysis in the 100 or so evaluations I've done? Probably 3 or 4 times. How many times have I done theory of change? 100 times. Yeah? So getting that commitment to understanding the basics of the theory of change and understanding how that works and then moving on to the realistic approaches and then moving on to the contribution analyses probably is the way I'd want to recommend it for you. Yeah? What I don't want to do today is get you running really, really fast ever before you've started walking, because that way you fall over. Yeah? No, seriously, you will. You will fall over yourselves, or you'll fall over when you're talking to people like me who are bidding to do work for you. So just hold on to the centrality of the theory of change model, yeah? And we'll give a little example around that as we get to the first exercise to test that and develop that a little bit more fully. I will now want to just introduce 3 methods very briefly, again that you'll hear evaluators and consultants talk about, which again offer perspectives, their methods, their approaches for how you can evaluate. And some of these, this is the problem with academia, sometimes they call the very obvious things very sophisticated names. They're just bleedingly obvious, actually. Most significant change, what people refer to as the MSc approach, this was developed by 2 academics in about 2005, Davis and Hart, and this one is all about a participatory process. It's not a paper-based process, it's not a theory of change analytical-based process, it's a participatory process, talking to people, to try and build up a collection of stories from beneficiaries, yeah, as to significant changes that have resulted as a consequence of the intervention. So you've had some resource from the program, you've had some involvement with the program, I'm talking to you to understand your perspective on what those changes have been as a result of intervention. And typically this involves bringing together a group of stakeholders who will review and discuss and collate the evidence that has been provided by beneficiaries on how they are finding the program making a difference for them. It's a bit like reviewing a set of stories from program participants as to what most matters for them. And typically what most significant change does as a method is to ask program beneficiaries, looking back over the last 6 months, 3 years, whatever it is, what do you think the most significant change in X or Y as a result of this program has been? Now, this is quite a different approach. It's not actually trying to get explanation from the theory of change, us thinking at our desks as to why this might have occurred. This is asking practically people who've been impacted by the program where they think it has been most impactful and why. Okay? And then bringing those together, synthesizing those together into an overall assessment, yeah, of where the program is making a difference, where the program is adding most value. And if done well, this sort of learning can then be used to further refine, further redevelop, building on Philip's point about iterating, developing the existing theory of change you've got to include and allow for that intelligence and that experience. Yeah? So most significant change as the first of this second group. And then the success case method that people talk about, what consultants often refer to as the SCM method. Again, this was an academic approach. What this is essentially about is trying to understand in extreme what's gone terribly, what's gone fantastically well in my intervention through a process of case study. Again, it's not sitting at a desk with a theory of change and trying to explain. This is about going to talk to participants and finding out from them, through case study work, what has gone well, what has gone badly. It's intended to be quick and simple, yeah. It's focused on, very deliberately, on the best and the worst cases that the intervention is giving rise to, and trying to explain why disaster has presented in some cases and why success has presented in others, and what's the explanation for those two differences. Just drawing on one of the papers that I'll put in the reading list for you, it searches out and surfaces successes, bringing them to light in persuasive and compelling stories, case studies, so that they can be weighed, motivating a concrete example to others, learning better understanding of why things work and why they did not. Yeah. So again, not out of the theory of change, but just drawn from talking to those beneficiaries who've been impacted very positively or negatively by the programme. And then the third one, which I've just started to use a bit actually this last 12 months, is what we call qualitative comparative analysis. And what this is trying to do is look across programs, look across interventions, within those programs and interventions, looking at common characteristics and the extent to which those characteristics appear to be correlated with success of impact of program, and why. Again, it's a case-based method involving participation rather than simply sitting at your desk reading the theory of change. Not used widely yet, but it's starting to build. And it's about trying to identify, as I say, potentially relevant causal factors in your group of beneficiaries to which you can then ascribe a 0 or a 1, maybe a multivariable value or a fuzzy value, to say, to a greater or lesser extent, this factor appears to be causal on the success or otherwise of a program. So this is just a little example that a colleague of mine was working with recently on a evaluation, and essentially he was defining here for a transnational program, country 1, country 2, country 3, and he, through thinking through his theory of change and then doing some discussions, had identified a set of factors: existence of space for dialogue between state and civil society, capacity of key civil society actors, horizontal coordination. And he was then saying, if you look at the, and then finally the outcome that was being experienced by each of the countries, and he then worked through to say, okay, for this country, for this factor, for this country, for this factor, for this country, for this factor, what are these sorts of judgmental weights that I can give to what I am observing through this qualitative comparative analysis. And he sort of develops a little simple table that says, look, you know, for this country where it appears to have quite a strong outcome, and I've assessed it here 1 and I've assessed it here 1, okay, this country here I've assessed the middle outcome and for the factors here, yeah, and on this one here, okay, and what he's then sort of imputing is that probably to get to this scoring here, 1 and 0.5, there's probably something happening around these two factors, yeah, that actually start to give rise to that outcome. So his hypothesis is, his view is that factor B and factor C actually may be more important than factor A in actually delivering success, in delivering impact for that intervention. Yeah. Now that's just a bit of a noddy example. Sorry, you understand noddy here? Okay. He's a cartoon character with big ears. It's a simple example. Yeah, here. But it's trying to get across the point that what this is seeking to do is, for the aspects of the program you're trying to understand and the factors that you're interested in, what is the correlation across having these factors and what is beginning to come evident in terms of outcome, and starting to impute a degree of causality and explanation.
If you'd like to see more details about the evaluation of INTERREG programs and projects, please check out the different models INTERREG produced. In each of the models, you will find various materials such as videos, guidance papers, Q&A documents, links, and other details.